There's a hole in the ground in Medicine Hat, Alberta, that almost changed the course of World War II history. Most people walk right over it without ever knowing what lies beneath their feet. But 70 German prisoners of war knew every inch of it, because they dug it themselves, one handful of dirt at a time, plotting the most audacious escape attempt ever conceived on Canadian soil. This isn't just another war story. This is about desperation, ingenuity, and the lengths human beings will go to for freedom. September 1944. The war in Europe is raging, but here in the quiet prairie town of Medicine Hat, something extraordinary is happening beneath the surface. The Canadian government has established internment camps across the country, housing thousands of German prisoners captured in North Africa and Europe. These aren't your average soldiers. Many of them are hardened veterans, U-boat commanders, Luftwaffe pilots, men who have seen the worst of combat and refuse to accept that their war is over. They're locked up thousands of miles from home, surrounded by flat, endless prairie where a man can be spotted for miles in any direction. Escape seems impossible, but that word doesn't exist in their vocabulary. The camp at Medicine Hat holds about 750 prisoners. It's surrounded by barbed wire, watchtowers, guards with rifles and dogs. The Canadians think they've built an escape-proof facility. After all, where would anyone go even if they got out? The nearest neutral territory is thousands of miles away. Mexico is impossibly far south. The United States wouldn't harbor enemy soldiers. And going north, that's just more frozen wilderness. The geography itself is a prison. But the Germans have a plan, and it's more ambitious than anything the Canadians could have imagined. In one of the barracks, a group of prisoners begin meeting in secret. They're led by a U-boat officer, a man who spent years in cramped submarines beneath the Atlantic, learning to work in impossible conditions with limited resources. If anyone can organize a mass escape from this prairie prison, it's him. The group starts small, just a handful of trusted men. They study the guards' routines, watch the patrol patterns, measure distances. They need intelligence before they can act. And slowly, carefully, they begin to formulate a plan that seems absolutely insane. They're going to dig a tunnel. Not just any tunnel, but one that stretches from their barracks all the way under the wire, under the guard path, emerging outside the camp perimeter in a spot where the watchtowers can't see. The distance, over 150 feet, through hard prairie clay, with no proper tools, no engineering equipment, no blueprints, just determination and whatever materials they can scavenge or steal. The challenges are staggering. First, where do you even start digging? The barracks are inspected regularly. The guards aren't stupid. They know prisoners try to escape. They know about tunnels. They check for them. The floor is concrete in most places, and any disturbance would be noticed immediately. But these men find a solution that's brilliant in its simplicity. There's a stove in the barracks, a coal-burning heater that sits on a small foundation. The area around it isn't inspected as carefully because it's dirty, covered in coal dust and ash. It's the perfect cover. They begin their work in October just as winter starts approaching. The timing is intentional. Winter means longer nights, more darkness to cover their eventual escape. But it also means frozen ground, which will make digging even harder. They don't care. They're committed now. The entrance to the tunnel is carefully concealed beneath the stove. They've created a false floor section that can be lifted and replaced without leaving obvious traces. It's convincing enough that even during inspections, the guards walk right over it. The actual digging begins. They work in shifts with lookouts posted to warn of any approaching guards. The tunnel is narrow, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through on his belly. There's no room to turn around. If something goes wrong, if there's a collapse, the man inside could be trapped, buried alive in the cold earth. But they take that risk every single night. One man digs, filling a makeshift container with dirt, then squirms backward to the entrance where others haul it up. Then the next man goes in and continues. But here's the problem that would have stopped most people immediately. What do you do with all that dirt? We're talking about a tunnel over 150 feet long, maybe 4 feet deep in places. That's tons of earth. Literal tons. You can't just pile it up somewhere. You can't dump it outside because the guards will see the fresh earth and know immediately what's happening. And you can't hide that much dirt inside a barracks without it being obvious. This is the challenge that's defeated countless escape attempts throughout history. But the Medicine Hat prisoners come up with something clever. They distribute the dirt, small amounts at a time, scattered in different locations. Some goes into the attic spaces above the barracks, spread thin so it doesn't cause the ceiling to sag. Some gets mixed with the ashes from the stove and disposed of with the regular ash removal. Some gets carried out in trouser legs during exercise periods and gradually scattered across the compound. It's painstaking work, requiring dozens of men to be involved, all keeping the secret. And somehow, incredibly, it works. The guards suspect nothing. As October turns to November, the tunnel grows longer. The men are making progress, maybe 2 or 3 feet a night when conditions are good. But the work is exhausting. The digger lies on his stomach in the dark, chipping away at the hard clay with makeshift tools, fashioned from scavenged metal, stolen kitchen utensils, anything with an edge. The air is thick and stale. There's barely enough oxygen. Men come out of the tunnel gasping, covered in dirt and sweat despite the cold. Some collapse from exhaustion. But the next night they go back down. The alternative is staying prisoner for years, maybe for the rest of the war. That's not acceptable. They've engineered ventilation using stolen pipes and tins, creating an air shaft that brings fresh air into the tunnel. It's crude but effective. They've shored up the walls with boards salvaged from bed frames and packing crates, preventing collapses. They're using stolen candles and fat lamps for light, though the smoke is a constant problem. The whole operation requires coordination among dozens of prisoners. Some dig, some dispose of dirt, some craft tools, some steal supplies, some act as lookouts, some create diversions to distract the guards. It's a full-scale underground resistance operation happening right under the noses of the Canadian authorities. The guards, for their part, aren't incompetent. They conduct regular inspections. They count prisoners multiple times a day. They search the barracks. They know that escape attempts are a constant threat, but they're looking for the wrong things in the wrong places. They're checking the perimeter fence for signs of digging from outside. They're watching prisoners during outdoor exercise periods. They're searching the obvious hiding spots. The stove area, covered in coal dust and ash, seems like the least likely place for anything suspicious. And that's exactly why it works. By late November, the tunnel is getting close to the target distance. The men have been working for nearly 2 months and the end is finally in sight. They've had close calls. Once, during an inspection, a guard stood directly on the false floor near the stove entrance while questioning prisoners about missing kitchen supplies. The prisoners held their breath, certain they were about to be discovered. But the guard moved on, suspecting nothing. Another time, part of the tunnel wall collapsed, nearly trapping a digger. They spent hours carefully excavating and reinforcing, losing precious progress but avoiding catastrophe. The plan for the actual escape is ambitious. They intend to move 70 men through the tunnel in a single night. 70. Not just a handful of determined officers, but a small army of prisoners, all making a break for freedom simultaneously. The reasoning is sound. If only a few men escape, the guards will immediately organize a focused manhunt. But if 70 men scatter in different directions, the authorities will be overwhelmed. Some are bound to make it, and that's worth the risk. They've been preparing false documents, civilian clothes made from dyed uniforms, maps sketched from memory and stolen reference materials. They've divided into groups based on language skills and planned different escape routes. Some will try to make it to the United States border, hoping to blend in with immigrant communities. Others plan to head for the coast, somehow find passage on neutral ships. A few even discuss the possibility of reaching Mexico, though it's thousands of miles through foreign territory. The plans are desperate, but these are desperate men. Early December arrives. The tunnel is nearly complete. They're so close they can almost taste freedom. The prisoners begin preparing for the escape attempt. They hoard food from their rations, small amounts that won't be missed but that will sustain them during the first crucial days on the run. They memorize their cover stories. They say goodbye to friends who aren't part of the escape, knowing they might never see them again. The tension in the barracks is electric. Everyone knows something big is about to happen. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. There's a prisoner in the camp, a man who's not part of the escape group. His reasons are his own. Maybe he thinks the attempt is doomed. Maybe he's afraid of the punishment if they're caught. Maybe he's just made peace with captivity. Whatever his motivations, he makes a decision that will change everything. He talks to a guard, not directly at first, just hints and suggestions. He lets slip that something unusual might be happening in one of the barracks, just enough to raise suspicion without seeming like outright betrayal. The guards begin paying closer attention. They increase inspections in that particular barracks. They watch the prisoners more carefully. And one day, during a surprise inspection, a guard notices something odd about the area near the stove. Maybe it's a smudge in the coal dust that doesn't look right. Maybe it's the way the floorboards sound when he walks over them. Maybe it's just intuition born from months of watching prisoners. But he decides to investigate more thoroughly. The guards start moving the stove. The prisoners watch in horror, knowing that in moments, months of backbreaking work will be exposed. They consider rushing the guards, creating some kind of diversion, anything to prevent the discovery. But they're unarmed, outnumbered, and violence would only make things worse. They can only stand there as the guards lift away the false floor section and reveal the entrance to their tunnel. What happens next surprises everyone. The guards are astounded. They've heard about escape tunnels in other camps, but they never imagined something this sophisticated, this ambitious, happening right under their feet. They order men into the tunnel to explore its full extent. The guards crawl through, measuring, examining the engineering. It stretches over 150 feet exactly as planned. The shoring is solid. The ventilation system is clever. In a few more days, maybe a week, it would have reached beyond the perimeter. The escape would have been possible. The prisoners responsible for the tunnel are identified and segregated. They're not mistreated. The Canadians generally run humane camps compared to prisoner facilities in other parts of the world, but they're punished. Some are transferred to higher security facilities. Privileges are revoked for the entire camp. Security is dramatically increased. The tunnel itself is filled in, and new measures are implemented to prevent future attempts. Guards start probing the ground with long metal rods, checking for hollow spaces beneath the surface. Inspections become more frequent and thorough. The brief moment when escape seemed possible is over. But here's what makes this story truly remarkable. The tunnel under Medicine Hat represents something deeper than just an escape attempt. These men were professional soldiers, trained to never give up, to always seek opportunities to return to the fight. The Geneva Convention actually required them to try to escape. It was their duty as military personnel. And beyond duty, there was pride. They were Germans, and in that era, German military culture emphasized discipline, determination, and refusal to accept defeat. Building that tunnel wasn't just about freedom. It was about maintaining dignity, about refusing to be passive captives, about proving to themselves and their comrades that they were still soldiers, still dangerous, still relevant to the war even though they were thousands of miles from any battlefield. The Canadian Guards, for their part, developed a grudging respect for the prisoners after discovering the tunnel. The engineering was impressive. The organization required was extraordinary. The security needed to keep 70 men silent about the plan for months was remarkable. These weren't mindless fanatics. These were intelligent, capable, determined individuals who happened to be on the opposite side of a terrible conflict. After the discovery, relations in the camp actually improved in some ways. The prisoners had made their attempt and failed. Honor was satisfied. They could settle into captivity with less restlessness, having proven to themselves they'd tried everything possible. The war continued for several more months. In Europe, Allied forces pushed deeper into Germany. The U-boats that had terrorized Atlantic shipping were being hunted to extinction. The Luftwaffe was running out of planes and pilots. By spring of 1945, it was clear the Third Reich was collapsing. And in Medicine Hat, the German prisoners listened to news reports, watched their captors' faces, and slowly came to terms with the fact that their side was losing. The tunnel escape, which had seemed so crucial just months before, now seemed like a relic from a different time. Even if they'd succeeded in escaping, where would they have gone? What would they have accomplished? When the war in Europe finally ended in May 1945, the Medicine Hat camp held a strange mixture of emotions. The prisoners were devastated by Germany's defeat, worried about their families back home in a destroyed country, uncertain about their own futures. But there was also relief that the killing was over. They'd survived. They'd be going home eventually. The camp gradually emptied over the following months as repatriation was organized. The prisoners returned to a Germany that was unrecognizable, divided, occupied, its cities in ruins. Many of them probably thought back to that tunnel during the difficult years of Reconstruction. That moment when escape seemed possible. That moment when their fate seemed to be in their own hands. The tunnel itself was filled in completely, the area paved over. For years, nobody talked much about it. The prisoners who returned to Germany had more pressing concerns than reminiscing about their time in Canadian captivity. The Canadian guards moved on with their lives. The camp was eventually demolished. Medicine Hat grew and changed. But the story didn't disappear entirely. Local historians kept the memory alive. Occasionally, articles would appear in newspapers, talking about the tunnel, about the elaborate escape plan that almost succeeded. There's a plaque now, marking the approximate location where the camp once stood. Not many people stop to read it. It's just a small piece of metal with some text, easy to walk past without noticing. But that plaque represents something important. It represents a moment when the Second World War, that global catastrophe that touched every continent, reached into the Canadian prairies and created this strange, tense little drama. Men who'd fought in North Africa, who'd sailed U-boats beneath the Atlantic, who'd bombed Allied cities, suddenly found themselves imprisoned in Medicine Hat, Alberta, of all places. And their response wasn't resignation. Their response was to grab stolen kitchen knives and bed frame slats and start digging. There's something fundamentally human about that tunnel. When people are caged, they dream of freedom. When people are told something is impossible, they try it anyway. When people have nothing but time and determination, they accomplish extraordinary things. Those prisoners weren't heroes, let's be clear about that. They were fighting for a regime that committed unspeakable atrocities. But as individuals, as men trapped far from home in a conflict they didn't start and couldn't end, they demonstrated qualities that transcend politics: courage, ingenuity, persistence, solidarity. They turned a barracks floor into an engineering project. They moved tons of earth with their bare hands. They kept a secret among 70 people for months. That's remarkable regardless of the context. The Medicine Hat Tunnel also tells us something about the nature of prisoner-of-war camps that often gets lost in simplified narratives. These weren't simple places where guards stood on one side and prisoners on the other. They were complex social environments where human relationships developed, where respect could exist even between enemies, where daily life continued despite the larger conflict raging elsewhere. The guards weren't monsters. The prisoners weren't evil incarnate. They were all just people caught up in circumstances beyond their control, doing what they thought was right or necessary or required by duty. The tunnel represents the prisoner's duty to escape. The discovery represents the guard's duty to prevent it. And somehow, despite those opposing duties, everyone made it through without major violence or tragedy. Today, if you visit Medicine Hat, you probably won't think about German prisoners or tunnels or escape attempts. You'll think about whatever brought you to this prairie town: business, family, tourism passing through. The landscape is peaceful. The sky is vast. The wind blows across flat land that stretches to the horizon. It seems like the least likely place for dramatic wartime intrigue. But that's the thing about history. It happens everywhere. It leaves traces that fade but never completely disappear. Somewhere beneath the streets of Medicine Hat, mixed into the earth, are the remnants of that tunnel. Bits of wood from the shoring, maybe. Flakes of metal from the stolen tools. Microscopic fragments of the candles they burned while digging. Physical evidence of an extraordinary human endeavor. The story of the Medicine Hat Tunnel deserves to be remembered not because it succeeded, it didn't, but because it represents a universal human truth. When people are pushed into corners, when their freedom is taken away, when they face years of captivity with no clear end in sight, they don't always accept it passively. Sometimes they fight back in whatever way they can. For these German prisoners, fighting back meant digging. It meant organizing. It meant risking punishment for a chance, however slim, at freedom. They knew the odds were against them. They knew that even if they got out of the camp, they'd face enormous challenges trying to avoid recapture. They knew the whole plan might be discovered before completion. But they dug anyway, night after night, for months, because the alternative was doing nothing. There's a lesson there that extends beyond World War II, beyond prisoner-of-war camps, beyond Medicine Hat. It's about agency in the face of powerlessness. It's about finding ways to resist, to maintain dignity, to refuse to be completely controlled by circumstances. Those prisoners couldn't change the fact that they were in a camp. They couldn't end the war. They couldn't go home. But they could dig. And in the digging, they reclaimed some measure of control over their own fate. That's a deeply human impulse that resonates across time and culture. The tunnel failed. The men were caught. They stayed prisoners until the war ended. From one perspective, all their effort was wasted. But from another perspective, that tunnel was a success from the moment they began digging. It gave them purpose. It gave them hope. It gave them something to work toward during months that otherwise would have been mind-numbing monotony. It bound them together in a common cause. It proved to them that they were still capable, still dangerous, still soldiers rather than just inmates. The psychological value of that tunnel might have been greater than any practical escape could have provided. Think about the men who dug that tunnel. Most of them survived the war and went home. They lived through the difficult years of German reconstruction. Many probably lived into the 1970s, 1980s, even 1990s. They became grandfathers, telling stories to children about the war years. And somewhere in those stories, there must have been tales about a tunnel beneath Medicine Hat, about the time they almost escaped from a Canadian prison camp, about the determination and ingenuity required to dig through hard prairie clay with stolen utensils, about the comradeship among the diggers, about the disappointment when the guards discovered their work. Those stories, passed down through families, are part of the legacy of that tunnel. The tunnel under Medicine Hat is a footnote in the vast narrative of World War II. It didn't change the course of the war. It didn't result in any successful escapes. It's not taught in history classes or featured in documentaries. But it happened, and it mattered to the people involved, and it tells us something valuable about human nature and the will to be free. In a war that killed millions and destroyed cities and reshaped the entire world, this small drama played out beneath the prairie, almost succeeding, ultimately failing, but leaving behind a story worth telling.